Our lesson this morning is on Solomon. After King David comes Solomon, but in between there's a half step. And I want to touch on that for just a moment. And before we do that, just in a way of review, Moses makes it clear early on. Moses says, "You will know that you have a good king when they have learned the book of Deuteronomy and know it by heart, have written it by their own hand, and carry it with them so that they may reflect God's glory." That's the positive thing. The other part is a good king will not collect horses, will not collect wives, will not collect gold, and will not collect silver. That's kind of foundational that we'll put on the side for a moment. And then David is king, and David is getting really old.
How old was he?
He is getting close to 70. And he's getting sick. So they prescribed for him a bed warmer. There are three classifications of women in the Old Testament. There are wives, there are concubines, and for the really old, there's a bed warmer. Now I checked, not for myself because I'm not old enough, but for some of the grumpy old men in the choir. Neither Medicare nor Obamacare will pay for it. And a bed warmer, on the one hand, is a nurse. But they do a search throughout the land to find the most beautiful young woman they can find. And the rationale is simple, that for an old, sick guy, nothing will make him feel better than a good-looking young nurse to take care of him. Not part of our history, but part of the reality of life. And during this time where David is sick and has his bed warmer, his oldest son is named Adonijah. Now, does anybody even know anyone with the name Adonijah? Anybody always hope you have a grandchild named Adonijah? My confession, my great-grandfather, his name was Adonijah Leeds. That's worse than naming a boy Sue. And I figure there's only one of two reasons for it. One is, my great-grandfather was born in 1854, and about 100 years ago, only about 20% of our country, people knew how to read. So I figured maybe my great-great-grandparents didn't know how to read and wanted a biblical name and opened up the Bible and pointed. That's one reason. The other possible is Adonijah is described as an extremely handsome man. So I figured, well, maybe they did know how to read and took one look at this gorgeous baby and said, he is such a good-looking dude, we need to call him Adonijah. I don't know which one it is, but no one in the right mind would call their kid Adonijah. But anyhow, my great-grandfather's name is that, and Adonijah is the oldest son of King David. Being the oldest son and having a sick father, he decides that he's going to declare himself to be king. And he does. And he starts to put together an army, and he's got a lot of powerful people around him in support. And he goes around proclaiming that he is King Adonijah. Now, another story is the prophet Nathan. Nathan, you'll recall, is the prophet who, when David had his affair with Bathsheba and had Bathsheba's husband killed, it was Nathan the prophet who went to David, told him a story, and then said, "You are the man. This is your problem, and you're the one that had him killed." The interesting thing about David is, in most cases, if you're talking about employment, the whistleblower gets fired. Or one who comes to you with criticism generally becomes an enemy after that. David, the reason David is so good as a king is, from that point on, he kept that prophet close to him as an advisor for the rest of his life. And while David is sick, Nathan the prophet goes to his wife Bathsheba and says, "You need to know, and David needs to know, that Adonijah is setting himself up as king. And you know, and I know, and David knows that he wants Solomon to be king. Therefore, you need to go tell David, and I will come in behind you to verify everything that you say." So Bathsheba goes to her sick husband and says, "This is what's going on. You need to know this." And then Nathan the prophet comes in and says, "Everything that she told you is true." So King David says, "I need to set up Solomon as king." So they're not waiting for him to die. He's going to do it early. And our pastor made reference to this on Palm Sunday. To demonstrate that Solomon is now the king, they put him on David's donkey and march him through the streets of Jerusalem. And everyone then knows that Solomon, sitting on David's donkey, is the new king. That's how Solomon becomes king. Adonijah, on the other hand, hears what happened and what David did for Solomon, and he's worried. He knows he's strong enough to defeat Solomon, but he knows he's not strong enough to defeat David and Solomon. So he goes back to the house of David and says, "I made a mistake. I'm not fighting my brother. Please forgive me." And Solomon is then king. A little while later, when David dies, Adonijah goes to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and says, "You'll recall that I turned myself in. I didn't fight anyone. I did it graciously. And out of the kindness that I have shown the royal family, I want you to go to Solomon and get his permission for me to marry David's bedwarmer." So she does. And Solomon, smart guy, he knows that his older brother, if he then marries David's bedwarmer, the combination of his being the oldest son plus married to David's former bedwarmer gives him a claim to the crown. and we'll fight him. So Solomon announces that this is Adonijah's last day on earth and has him killed. Whew. Now, why would anyone name their son Adonijah? Solomon then becomes, his prayer is for the Lord to make him wise that he may know how to rule his people. And Solomon goes down in history as one of the wisest of kings. The famous story is the two women that come, and one of them claims that her child died, and the other one swiped her child and switched babies. You've all heard that story? And then they bring the two women to Solomon. Solomon looks at the two women and the baby and demands that a sword be brought. They bring him a sword, and he then declares that he will cut the baby in half, give half to one mother, half to the other mother. One mother says, "That's great, do it that way," and the other one says, "No. I would prefer that the baby lived and I not have it. Then give it to the other lady." And Solomon says, "You are the real mother," and he gives the baby to the woman who wanted him to live. And that story is spread throughout the land about Solomon's wisdom. On a side, and I've told it before, I love Jewish humor. I think Jewish humor is fabulous. And Jewish friends tell the story of a small village in Russia in which there were two women to be married, but there were no men in town. So they wrote to a school far away, and they said, "We need two men, and when they graduate, they're welcome to marry our daughters, and we'll give them a farm," etc., etc. And so when the men graduated from school, they were traveling to this farm, and a bunch of Cossacks came and attacked them, and one of the gentlemen was killed, and the other one survived and made it back to the village. Now there's the problem. There's only one man, but there's two women. So the two women come before the rabbi, and they say, "Rabbi, we have one man. Two of us want husbands for our daughters." And the rabbi, in the tradition of Solomon, says, "Bring me a sword." They bring him a sword, and he said, "I'm going to cut the man in half." The lady over here says, "Yeah, cut him in half." The woman over here says, "No, don't cut him in half. Let him live." And the rabbi says to the gentleman, "Come over here. This is where you belong." And the people are absolutely shocked. And they say to the rabbi, "Why did you give him to the family where the woman wanted to cut him in half?" And he said, "Isn't it obvious who the real mother-in-law is?" Well, that's good. Anyhow, back to Solomon. Solomon then builds the temple to the Lord. It is filled. There's a picture of it on your bulletin. The picture won't show that it is filled with gold and copper and silver and jewels. It's like one big jewelry store. Dedicated to the Lord. He then spends the next 13 years building his own palace. And his palace is huge. It's filled with all of the latest, the hardest woods, all hand carved. It's gold, it's silver, it's marble. It's a sight to behold. And where did he get all this gold? Where did he get all the silver? Where did he get all the copper? He found out the surrounding countries who had what. And then he married the king's daughters. In Jewish history, I don't know where the number comes from, but the limit of wives that one is allowed is 8. I have no idea where that number comes from. Solomon's lifetime, he has 700 wives. 300 concubines. I can't even imagine that. I had 2 daughters. One wife, 2 daughters. Do you know how many hormones that is in one house? "700 wives? Can you imagine saying yes, dear, 700 times before you leave the house? 700. 300 concubines. Horses galore. Solomon has tied himself up politically into every country that surrounds Israel. They're all family. He's married them all. And he lives in a house of luxury. He's got everything that money can buy. And the question is it a blessing or is it a curse? When he built the temple, the Lord said, "This temple will be a barometer for you. Follow me, and the people will look back in wonder. Turn your back on me, and it will turn to rubble. And everyone will know that you have turned your back on me." Solomon's life looks like one success story after another all through his life until the end. And at the end, he has 2 sons. They both go in different direction, and the country is torn apart. A really great, wise king, or a really stupid fool? What part of your life counts most? The beginning or the end? The blessings that you have been given, are they going to bless you or curse you? Jesus summarizes it this way, if you look at that whole life. Jesus simply says, "What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" What do you gain if you had a whole lot more possessions and you forget who you really are? That's our lesson for today. I don't know what God has blessed you with, but I hope that you know it better than anyone else? We all wish we had more gold and silver. I'm not into horses. We probably wish we had more cars. I really don't want any more wives. That's a compliment, by the way. But as you look over your life, my hope is that for all that you may lack, for we all lack stuff, that you may realize what you have been blessed with, and that you may continue to live your life in gratitude.